Welcome to the Senate Environment, Natural Resources Policy and Legacy Finance Committee. Today is Wednesday, February 9th, 2022, approximately 1:10 p.m. Let the record reflect that a quorum is present. Members, just a few housekeeping notes again. Remember to push the F1 button on your computer to make sure it's muted so that we don't have feedback. Your computers will say unmute to start speaking. Please don't do that. Use your microphones at the committee table. And Senator McEwen, we will try to see if you have a question. We'll try to make sure we see your raised hand. So with that, and remember that the microphones are very sensitive. So if you have sidebar communication, please take it away from the microphones. With that, today we have Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Commissioner Katrina Kessler. Welcome to the committee. And being this is your first time before us, maybe you can just give us a little bit about you before you start into your presentation. Welcome to the committee, and please state your name for the record.
Chair Rude and members, thank you very much. My name is Katrina Kessler for the record. I am the new Pollution Control Agency Commissioner, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm happy to provide a little bit of an introduction about myself and have some slides to go over what the agency has been working on since the last session. And again, I have members of our team here with me. If there are questions beyond my areas of expertise, this is the start of my third month in the job. So I'm still very much learning and really appreciate the excellent team around me, especially in situations like this. So I will share my screen and provide a little bit of more introduction about myself at this point. And then if people have questions, please feel free to interrupt. I'm happy to answer questions along the way. Great. So thanks again for having me here. The One Minnesota mission shown on the slide here directs state agencies and the work of what we do to improve the lives of Minnesotans by working collaboratively to implement policies that achieve results. And it asks state agencies and staff and commissioners to fulfill that mission by earning public trust, leading with humility and practicing servant leadership, respecting all perspectives, making sure that everyone who is impacted has a seat at the table, asking ourselves how our actions are either reinforcing or removing structural inequities, collaborating across government as well as with local partners, and being accessible, transparent, and accountable. And during my nearly 20 years of public service, I have tried to embody many of these values. I started out as a permit engineer at the Pollution Control Agency nearly 20 years ago. And in that role, my primary responsibility was to review wastewater treatment plans and specifications for large municipalities, food processing and agriculture facilities, metallic mining operations, and power generating facilities across the state. And in that role, my job was to just make sure that the chosen design was going to meet the standards. And while I have always had a appreciation for the translation of engineering principles and policy into permits, I really value and have learned the most when I've been able to interact with wastewater treatment operators and visit facilities across the state and hear from the people who are running those operations how they have innovated to improve water quality or to make improvements generally that result in cost effectiveness and overall savings. And I maintain today that the smartest people that I have ever met are wastewater treatment operators and farmers, and they are the most creative problem solvers that you can come across. And I really feel honored to be able to interact with them as part of this role. Part of my experience also was as the director of the Surface Water and Sewers Division within the Public Works Department of the city of Minneapolis. And in that role, I was responsible for the rehab, maintenance, capital investment in the city's 150-year-old plus wastewater and stormwater infrastructure. And I gained a new appreciation in that role for the challenges facing local governments across the state thinking about balancing the need to maintain and invest in infrastructure that is already past its design life and also meet water quality challenges and regulations. And then also think about the increasing intense rain events that were happening, as well as just meeting generally the demands that local governments have to provide equitable services to their citizens. This is no small task, and it's something I think about every day in my current role. In my personal life, I am a mom to a very active 13 and 10-year-old boys, and they, like their parents, enjoy swimming, biking, skiing, skating. And so we embrace the many seasons of Minnesota and the recreational opportunities. And in addition to keeping me busy, at least one of them regularly reminds me how uncool I am and how much I have to learn. And I think more than anything else, it's a reminder that we have to strive at any age to learn and continue to grow. And so in my current position at the Pollution Control Agency, I tried to lead with the perspective that we can always learn and do better. And we always do better when we listen and collaborate and raise up to celebrate innovative ideas. And I have seen firsthand how partnerships between local governments and businesses, as well as farmers and the state, can yield positive results that really support vibrant economies and a healthy environment. And that's the work that keeps me motivated and keeps me coming back. So at this point, I can transition to an update on what the agency has been working on since last session, unless anyone has any questions. All right, thanks. So starting in, we'll dive in things that have been coming up in the news or maybe of interest in the last 6 months. I think we all share the belief that Minnesota's most valuable resource is its waters. And I think everyone expects our lakes and streams to be suitable for fishing and swimming. And that's a regulatory goal. And I think it's just a goal that we all share. Last November, as we do every 2 years, the MPCA proposed its every 2 years impaired waters list. So the draft 2022 list. And that proposal adds 305 water bodies with more than 400 new impairments, bringing the total to more than 2,900 water bodies with many thousands of impairments. And this is sobering, but I will also point out that this action, the proposed 2022 list, also includes the removal of almost 100 impairments, and that's many more than we've seen in the past. And I think to the testament of this committee and all of your investment, the work that we're doing through the Clean Water Land and Legacy money, as well as the watershed approach and concerted investment at the state and local level, is paying dividends. And it's only because of the work of really hard working local partners that we're able to reach this milestone. And I do think the act of compiling the list is important. Of course, we owe this to the federal regulatory agency every 2 years, and it points out the efforts and investments in monitoring and assessment. But I think the real value in this work is communicating the progress we're making, as well as where we have additional work to do. And I will just point out that one of the PCA's proposals for the supplemental budget builds off this work. We've requested $1 million for the installation of 40 continuous nitrate sensors. And so these would be located in our large river systems, the Minnesota, the Mississippi, the St. Louis River, as well as the Red River. And installing those sensors would allow us to further fine tune the work that we're doing across the state to protect drinking water sources as well as habitat. And the last thing I'll note on this slide is, for the first time, the MPCA listed in November in our draft impaired waters list, waters in greater Minnesota as impaired for PFAS, or those perfluoroalkyl substances, forever chemicals in fish tissue. So this action proposes to add 15 water bodies as impaired for that fish tissue number in places like the St. Croix River, Lake Winona in Alexandria, and two lakes in St. Louis County near the Duluth Airport. So it highlights that what I think we all have known, that PFAS is not just a East Metro area challenge, it is a statewide challenge. The next thing I wanted to touch on really builds off that, which is our PFAS blueprint. And you may recall, to help us address this confounding PFAS challenge, together with other state agency partners, the MPCA rolled out this blueprint last February. And this is the result of more than 20 years of research and work. And we have learned a lot about PFAS and its uses. And the more we learn, I think the more confounding it becomes. We know that this now is everywhere. It's in carpets, it's in medicine, it's in our kitchen cabinets, it's in industrial processes, it's in commercial products. We find PFAS in air emissions, in wastewater, and stormwater. We know that there are more than 5,000 PFAS structures and over 9,000 identified chemicals, and more are invented every day. So as we understand the threat, we need to do more. The more we learn, the more we understand how we can target our work effectively. And that leads us to the point of this slide, which is one of the steps called out in the PFAS blueprint is the development of a PFAS monitoring plan. So the MPCA has been discussing a draft PFAS monitoring plan with water, land, and air stakeholders for the past 6 months. And we right now are currently reviewing comments that we've received from these valuable partners during a recent public input process. We know that the federal government is also working on a framework for the regulation of PFAS, and the work called out in the draft monitoring plan in front of us, which is really not a regulatory approach. It's working with permitted facilities to understand risks, to identify sources and minimize sources prior to having to take regulatory action, is where we would like to go next. And we know that we have significant work to do. And I will just add one more thing here. There are 2 proposals in our supplemental budget request that would help advance this work at the local level. The one is for $2 million. That would be a one-time influx of investment for grants for cities and counties to do monitoring, to identify sources and to minimize sources, to replace aqueous firefighting foam that may still have PFAS in it and other PFAS threats to their community. And in addition to that, we've asked for $500,000 in one-time investment to do a study across the state to baseline what is the normal level of PFAS, so we know how to actually target the work going forward, whether that's in soil or water. Because we know that this problem is not going away, and we want to be really effective with the dollars. I will say also that the federal infrastructure money that the state is expecting through the state revolving fund also offers an opportunity to leverage some of these funds to also target minimizing PFAS. And we know that PFAS is not just a problem in fish. And this is highlighted here on this slide. In August, the MPCA and the DNR finalized the East Metro drinking water supply plan. So this is a culmination of a $700 million investment in the plan to invest the $700 million in clean and reliable drinking water. The plan includes drinking water projects recommended by the affected communities. So this has grown out of years of stakeholder groups from representing those areas who have made these recommendations and suggestions with their technical consultants as well as the state. The plan prioritizes using drinking water as groundwater as a source of drinking water to the extent possible, and prioritizes drinking water protection, drinking water treatment, and operating and maintenance for both public systems and private wells. And I will just finally say that the plan has the flexibility and resilience to respond to future uncertainties, because if there's one thing we've learned about PFAS is that we continue to learn more, and it has the opportunity to allow us to be nimble going forward in these communities that we know are impacted. We know also that the East Metro isn't the only community or part of the state dealing with contaminated drinking water. Last summer, the MPCA completed a round of sampling of residential wells in Andover in the Red Oaks neighborhood that showed the presence of 1,4-dioxane and PFAS above the Minnesota Department of Health's health-based guidance for drinking water. One residential well showed results of 2,200 times the health-based guidance. And since discovering that contamination, the MPCA has provided the residents with wells at or above the health risk value with bottled water until a long-term solution is implemented. And along those lines, the agency has partnered with the city of Andover, Senator Abler, and Representative Scott to ensure that residents have safe, long-term access to municipal well. And that's represented by a $12 million request in the bonding bill to design and construct new municipal water mains for the residents in the city of Andover. And the last thing I'll say here is the residents of Andover and the citizens who live in the East Metro, they didn't ask for contaminated drinking water. And it's really important that we hear that the state is committed to ensuring households with contaminated drinking water sources currently exceeding the health-based guidance are eligible to connect to municipal water supplies at no costs. Households with contaminated drinking water below the health-based guidance in this area will receive additional sampling so that we know we are continuing to track this going forward. Shifting gears now to the bulging waste issues that we have in the state. Last summer, the MPCA announced two major steps to address the Twin City metro area's growing garbage problem. As a short-term solution, the agency has recommended expanding 4 South Metro landfills to make space for 5.6 million tons of new garbage over the next 7 years. And for context, it's important to know this, that the metro area generates about 3.3 million tons of waste a year, and the amount of garbage going to landfills has actually increased by 30% in the past year. At the current rate, we're going to run out of space. So the 4 facilities that the agency has announced will receive additional waste are the Burnsville Sanitary Landfill, the Demcon facility in Shakopee, the Pine Bend Sanitary Landfill in Inver Grove Heights, and the Rich Valley Landfill also in Inver Grove Heights. So in addition to announcing the expansion of those landfills, we have prepared a draft environmental impact statement of the proposed expansion at one of them, which is the Burnsville Sanitary Landfill. That would increase its capacity by almost 24 million cubic yards. And that expansion would extend the useful life of the Burnsville landfill by approximately 40 years to 2062. So at this point in the process, we are nearing the end of the environmental review. We're currently weighing the decision, and if that goes ahead, we will begin the permitting process, which will include the consideration of 1,4-dioxane and PFAS. And I think it's important that we note that the consideration of landfill expansions in the metro area further highlights the need that Minnesota we need to be talking about the way that we generate and dispose of waste, because we cannot keep expanding landfills into perpetuity. The loss of the waste to energy facility in Elk River has accelerated the state's landfill problems, but the amount of garbage is not decreasing. I will call out that to reduce waste and support recycling and reuse efforts, our supplemental budget proposal includes funds to expand recycling market development, prevent food waste, and increase access to composting and anaerobic digestion facilities. And that's in addition to the agency's bonding request that would expand new recycling and compost facilities in almost all parts of the state. Switching to something a little bit more uplifting, I'm happy to be able to highlight a couple of examples of the agency's work to partner with local communities to make a positive impact on the environment. In November, we announced more than $2.1 million in grants for an innovative electric school bus pilot project. As a result of the pilot project, 8 new electric school buses will soon be serving Minnesota school districts in Faribault, St. Paul, Columbia Heights, Morris, Osseo, and Fergus Falls. Some of the newly funded buses have already begun transporting Minnesota students, and the rest are expected to be in service by next fall. In addition to the 8 school buses, grantees received funding for charging stations. And with the new program, Minnesota is the first state in the Midwest to implement a program that will gather data about the bus's performance and reliability, because I think we all recognize we live in a climate where traditionally electric vehicles have been sometimes challenging. And so we are hopeful that this pilot will allow us to hone the way that we invest in electric infrastructure going forward. And we're also hopeful that this pilot can be expanded with money that may be coming to the state through the bipartisan infrastructure law from the federal government. The other positive news investment story is thanks to funding from you all last session, we announced in November the application process for the first round of grants to communities to help prepare for extreme weather events. Minnesota now ranks second in the country for extreme weather events, only behind California, and Minnesotans have seen a 366% increase in homeowner insurance rates since 1998. And we know that mega rains have become all too common, causing washed out roads, flooded basements, and closing businesses. Each of the next 2 years, we have approximately $870,000 available to help communities assess their vulnerabilities, risks, and develop and prioritize plans to improve stormwater infrastructure and reduce the frequency and the impacts of localized flooding. For this first round, the agency received 48 applications, more than half coming from greater Minnesota, totaling $3 million. And I think this is a testament that cities across the state recognize and are responding to the immense challenge facing their residents and businesses. And while planning is essential to get ready and to prioritize investments, we also know we must provide funding to implement these plans. And that's why we have proposed $21 million in the bonding bill to help implement the stormwater infrastructure projects, as well as $55 million in the supplemental one-time investment in other resilience work, including restoration of shorelines, stream banks, protection of other public entities, parks, libraries, and city facilities that are impacted from frequent and intense rain events. And we're looking forward to talking to you about these and other supplemental budget items in the future. And the last substantive event that has been in the news in the last 6 months is the Line 3 enforcement. And I wanted to provide you with a brief update of what's been going on. As you've heard, we have an ongoing investigation related to numerous frack outs or inadvertent releases of drilling mud that occurred during the construction of Line 3. And in August, the MPCA released the details of the 28 inadvertent releases or frack outs that occurred at 12 of the river crossings. And during normal investigations and compliance and enforcement activities, the agency follows strict state statutes on disclosing information before issuing a final decision. And in this case, the agency released the information to counteract growing misinformation spreading on social media. There is a clause in the data practices law that says that if there's a need to dispel widespread rumor or quell unrest, you can release information. And so that was the impetus for sharing the information about the frack outs. While the agency expects to finalize our investigation before the end of spring, I want to be clear that the release of drilling mud into wetlands, rivers, or surface water is a clear violation of water quality standards, and it was a violation of the certification that the MPCA issued to Enbridge. And we are committed to holding Enbridge accountable for these violations, and we are taking and going through the appropriate enforcement actions currently. And then before I conclude, I just want to again say thank you to Chair Rude and to the committee for the opportunity to be here today. I'm grateful for the time to be able to introduce myself in the new role and to share some of the updates of the agency's work from last session. This slide highlights the priority areas underpinning much of our ongoing work and the themes of some of the supplemental budget proposals I touched on today. I also just want to mention that at this moment in time, it's a really big priority of mine and of the agency to make sure that we're maximizing opportunities that are facing the state with the investment of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so whatever we can do at the state level to unlock more of those funds to address our significant environmental and infrastructure challenges, I think we're all in for that. So with that, Chair Rude, I'm happy to answer questions, and we have other members of the team again who can help if there are questions beyond my understanding.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming today. So members, are there questions? Oh, Senator Swedinski? Oh, who wants to go first? Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last year, the MPCA had changed the solid manure handling rules, and which I was in opposition to some of your points as it relates to that. And it was actually in legislation, there was a provision that changed a couple of those, subject to whether the EPA would sign off on it or not. Now the new rules, even under my legislation, were in excess of the guidelines of the federal EPA. Yet at the end of the day, the EPA said that we couldn't do that. I'm just wondering, how much pressure did your agency put on the federal EPA for that decision?
Commissioner.
Chair Rude and Senator Weber, thank you for the question. Well, we did write a letter to EPA and make them aware of the legislation and point out the fact that they had to make a decision and an action. I think that it is inappropriate for us to try to compel the EPA to do anything. They are, at the end of the day, our Clean Water Act boss. And previous people in this position have been in trouble for trying to compel the EPA to take a particular action or to not take a particular action. So I think we want to make sure that we maintain the clear lines of state authorities and federal authorities. So our role in that instance was just to communicate that an action was required on the part of EPA.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. An action, but you definitely gave them an idea of what you wanted their action to be, didn't you?
Commissioner.
Senator Weber, I think we pointed out the record that we had compiled that developed the permit conditions that ultimately were on public notice and included in the permit that were then changed by the legislation.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since that, and I understand that permits come up every 5 years, I believe it is, and so that's going to be an ongoing process. Have you started to see any change in the number of permits that are applied for and asking for renewal?
Commissioner.
Chair Rude and Senator Weber, we have not. I will note that we are switching our permit application process to an online process for the feedlot applications, as we are doing for other permitting programs. The online portal for application is not ready yet, and we have told people who are holders of that NPDES permit that they can wait to apply and operate under that previous version of the permit until the online portal is available. So it's more efficient for everyone to have to apply at one time. So I think it's important to note that the new provisions that were the subject of the legislation have not been put into anyone's permit unless they have applied separately. And that would only be brand new facilities, because all of the existing facilities we've told to hold off until the online permitting. So in essence, there was a 1-year delay in the implementation of the new permit.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you expect there to be a decline in the number of permits that are renewed?
Commissioner.
Chair Rude and Senator Weber, we have not been given an indication that there will be a decline.
Senator Weber.
That's it for now, Madam Chair.
Okay. Senator Swedinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 3 questions, so thank you.
You said 100 waters have been taken off the impaired waters list. Do you know, I mean, I think government, we do a pretty good job of complaining about our, people pointing out our failures. Our successes, we don't get enough attention. So do you know what your agency or the legislature, one or two things we did right to take those waters off the impaired waters list so we can move forward and make sure we do those things to continue to move forward?
Commissioner.
Senator Rude and Chair Rude and Senator Swedzinski, thank you so much for that question. And it gives me the opportunity to say that, yes, in the 2022 list, we are proposing to remove 100, which is more than we've ever removed before. We've actually removed more than 100, and the number keeps going up each time we get to this now every 2 years, which is a different trend than what we've seen in the past. And we do now know, with the benefit of the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment and the Clean Water Funds, what works and where it works. And we have examples that we can point to for you and others. And we try to, with the Clean Water Council and the other clean water funded agencies, tell those stories. And I think the more of us that can be telling those stories and to be congratulating our soil and water conservation district partners or our watershed districts or our landowners or our wastewater treatment plants, the better off we're going to be. Because you're exactly right. I think in public service, whether you're a public works wastewater operator or a combine driver or a state senator, I think we tend to focus on what is the emergency in front of us and not as much time on what did we learn in that success and how do we apply that going forward. And that's one of the things that we want to do more of. So happy to provide the committee with the examples of which waters have been delisted and what worked in those examples.
I'd appreciate that. Thank
you.
you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Commissioner and Senator Swedzinski. So I think one of the programs, and I been personally involved in this, is the Stop Over Salting. And so we've been really, and we have that coming forward again this year. And I think the MPCA has some funding requests because we have funded it through grants for the last 2 or 3 years. And now the grants are coming to an end. And it's been such a successful program because, one teaspoon of salt permanently pollutes 5 gallons of water. So if we can stop that from going in the water, we can stop the lakes being put on the list to begin with, because it's so hard to clean them up afterwards. And so I think each program like that going forward that we help stop the pollution is really a success story too. And I'm glad to hear that we've got the 100 lakes coming off. I mean, that's a hard thing. It's easy to pollute. It's hard to clean it up. And so I think prevention is as much a part of the pollution as the cleaning up and getting the standards. So with that, you had another question.
And it's probably cheaper.
That would be true.
Right. My second question, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, is, okay, I'm shocked that the landfill increase has gone up a third. If you had asked me how much garbage did we get rid of during COVID, I would think, more home cooking. I don't know. I would just think that the garbage receptacles in our end of our driveways went down half. That's what I would just predict. So to hear that it went up a third and we're already dealing with so many landfill issues as it is, I thought maybe one of the silver linings of COVID would have been our landfill use has plummeted. So to see it gone up is really disturbing, or startling, I guess is probably a better word. So I'd love to hear what you guys think resulted in that. Thank you, Madam
Commissioner.
Chair Rude and Senator Swedzinski, I too was shocked. And I have to say, we did eat at our house a lot, but we also got a lot of takeout. And so I don't know if that's indicative of what others were doing, but I am pleased to be joined by Assistant Commissioner Kudelka, who knows much more about this topic than me.
Mr. Kudelka, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Kirk Kudelka. I'm Assistant Commissioner at the MPCA and I work on land issues. So the large increase that you saw on the slide is data going back prior to COVID. The largest drivers of the waste in the metro area, number one was the closing of the Elk River Waste Energy Facility. That was about 300,000 tons a year that had to find a home in a landfill. That's basically a need for one whole new large landfill. The other piece is, while we've slowly been increasing the recycling and composting rate in the Minnesota and in the Twin Cities specifically, the number of people in Minnesota are growing. So the pie of waste, so to speak, keeps getting larger because each one of us creates about a ton of waste. So every additional resident that's added to the metro area is additional waste that's also created. Specifically to COVID, we are still waiting for some of the numbers to come back. The overall amount of waste, we can see some of the information from the solid waste management tax, and we still see that there has not been a decrease in waste. What has likely happened though is where the waste is generated has changed. So the waste that's generated at commercial entities or our businesses have gone down, but the waste at homes have gone up. So we're waiting to see what those numbers are to see the specific impacts of COVID, but overall, we are still creating a lot of waste in the metro and the rest of the state.
And Mr. Kudelka, what was the reason that the waste to energy was closed in Elk River if that was such an impact on the landfills?
Thank you, Chair and committee members. We know of two larger reasons. One is they were not able to get the waste to go to their facility to operate at full capacity. And that creates an inefficient system and creates cost changes. And then the company said is also that they went to other renewable sources that were less costly. And so they decided to close down that facility, decommission it, tear it down. And unfortunately, we've lost that capacity permanently.
And Senator Sadinsky, you have other question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You had said 366% increase in insurance rates.
Commissioner.
How much of that increase is attributed to things like climate change and these cataclysmic things that we're living through? Is it all 366% or? Anyways, I'm just curious. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner.
Chair Rude and Senator Swazinski, I don't know the exact breakdown, but we do know that the impact of more intense rain events and more flooding is a contributing factor, but we can certainly follow up with you on that question.
Senator Sadinsky? Fine. Members, are there other questions? Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kudelka, as it relates to landfills and recycling and that, isn't part of our problem nowadays also stemming from the fact that we have that the recycling market really isn't all that great, it isn't all that good from a financial standpoint right now, and that I know that many of the recyclers in my area really have struggled to find an outlet for some of their product.
Mr. Kudelka.
Chair and committee members, thank you for the question. There's a lot of things at work there. You are correct. Nationally, there has been some big changes on the materials that previously went to China and other places in East Asia, and those closed down markets. One of the good things about Minnesota is we've invested quite a bit in Minnesota companies, whether it's in Paynesville or St. Paul or Moorhead, to turn those things into products. So we didn't see that impact as much. And early on, there was that reduced cost for those commodities that were coming out of the recycling facilities. Some of those have rebounded, some are up at higher, but you're correct, we need to do more. And it's why it's in our budget for nearly $19 million to be used in the solid waste. And a good chunk of that would go to increasing market development, making valuable items out of it. And I think that's a good investment to help the whole state.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would mention, however, that the places that you mentioned where there's activity going on generally probably rely on the metro supply, whereas rural Minnesota, if you want to go to those facilities, you're going to eat up any savings in terms of transportation costs anyway. And so, I think at the end of the day, those are elements that have to be kept in mind too, because there are just some of our rural areas that are not going to be able to meet the goals, let's put it that way.
Mr. Kudelka.
Mr. Chair and committee members, transportation is a key part. And as we are looking to make investments in market development, one of the items we want to do is make sure there's diversity in places that take it and locations. For instance, the legislature has funded a market development grant at $400,000 a year. And a number of those recipients were in greater Minnesota to make sure that there were facilities out there to take those products.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I will kind of piggyback on Senator Weber. Where I am at, there is no opportunity to recycle. And so I don't have any place anymore to bring any of my recycling, so it all goes into the landfill. And that's a very sad thing because people really want to do the right thing. They want to recycle. And when there's no place for them to bring that, it's pretty troublesome. With that, I'm going to just say we should really help the counties with the SCORE grants and put that money back to where it belongs so that they can do recycling and that will help with the solid waste. Members, are there other questions? Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner and Assistant Commissioner. Thank you for being here. I'm not so sure I have a question. I'm not so sure I necessarily want an answer today because I think it's generally, complex enough so it needs some thought. But I've been on the bonding committee ever since I've been here. We have spent hundreds of millions of dollars perhaps on cleaning up landfills. Well, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars left to clean up going forward. We just all know that. And of course now we hear and understandably, of more and more solid waste going into landfills. And by the way, in the same packet, we talk about clean water and all that in terms of an objective. It just seems to me that, and I suspect on the shelves of the agency, there's all kinds of books about solid waste planning strategies and so on and so forth. But I just don't know if we really have one. And we just, in my opinion, we've got to find different ways to do this. We can't leave this problem for those that follow us 50 years from now that they're going to have hundreds of, maybe billions of dollars worth of cleanup costs. It's to be totally irresponsible for us to do this. My only plea is maybe huddle up someplace. I don't care if it's in my office or anywhere else, but we really need to talk about this, I think, from the standpoint of solid waste going forward. Almost anything we'd spend today would be cheaper than what it's going to cost 50 years from now to clean up our sins, so to speak. So I just urge the agency to kind of think about new strategies, new ways, innovation. They're all not going to be perfect. I understand that, but just simply putting waste in a hole in the ground, even with a liner, we ought to be able to do better than that in 2022, and we need to. And so that's my comments.
Chair Rude and Senator Semjum, I couldn't agree more. The more I learn about this, kind of flabbergasted I am. I think Assistant Commissioner Kudelka and I were talking earlier about if we had a time machine and we could go back 50 years ago, would we make the same decisions then that we did? And do we want to leave this for people 50 years from now? What decisions can we make with 2022 knowledge that make it better for the people who happen to be in these seats half a century from now? And I think we take that challenge very seriously. And I too think that this is not a sustainable plan or approach. And we're committed to continuing to be creative in this solution and welcome others to work with us on these really, insurmountable barriers at this point.
Madam Chair, I would just say funding the best recycling program in the world is still going to be cheaper than cleaning up landfills. There's a lot of energy in that waste. That's to be used also for those that can't be recycled. So it just seems to me we got to get a little smarter, maybe a little bit more dedicated to this cause, because I tell you what, if you're writing the bonding bill, the hardest entry you can make is spending whatever, 20, 30, 40 million dollars to clean up a landfill. There's so many other things you could rather do.
Thank you. Members, are there other questions? Senator McEwen, did I see that you had your hand raised? We don't want to miss you out in this conversation. So welcome, Senator McEwen.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate this opportunity. And thank you, Commissioner, for coming today and for talking to our committee. I'm hearing so many encouraging things from you and from the agency, and also from my colleagues here on this committee. So I'm really looking forward to the work ahead. It gives me some hope. And I had a question, and also I just wanted to put out a thanks to all of the people, all of the professionals who work for the MPCA. The work, as you well know, that you're doing now in this time period, this decade, is just so crucial to our future as a state and to the people of Minnesota. So thank you to all of the people in your agency who are doing that on the ground work. My question is, relates a little bit to, you brought up right at the end of your presentation, and I appreciated you speaking to it a little bit, the investigation that you're undertaking with the frac outs and the Line 3 pipeline. And I know that it's under, you're conducting the investigation right now, and there's certain things that you're not, that the agency feels that it can't discuss, and I respect that. But I guess my question is the investigation also going to take a look at agency actions and inactions, or is the investigation that's being undertaken purely going to come up with a look at what Enbridge did or didn't do? I guess I'm wondering about the scope of this investigation and what we can expect to see at the end. Thank you.
Sure. Chair Rude and Senator McEwen, first of all, thank you, Senator McEwen, for the appreciation for the staff scientists and staff at the MPCA. I too share the appreciation for the dedicated public servants who are doing this important work every day, and it's part of the reason why I am motivated to do this work. To the question about the investigation of Line 3, the scope of our work in front of us through the compliance and enforcement lens is about violations that the permit holder, and in this case, Enbridge, alleged violations that we are looking into. I think the other, that is the scope of the compliance and enforcement action. To your other question about actions of the agency, I will say that we as a learning organization are always striving to evaluate our performance, to hold ourselves to metrics, and to learn and continuously improve. And I think part of that is at the end of large multi-year permitting or enforcement efforts to think about how did it go? Do we have the right tools? Do we have the right expertise? And what did we learn? And so I think that's a separate type of continuous improvement mindset that's embedded into the agency. And I can tell you that we have thought a lot about if we were to do things that, again, if we would have learned anything, done anything differently. And those are things that we will continue to integrate into our work going forward. And we are happy to talk about that with you or others who may be interested. But that, again, is separate from the ongoing investigation, which we can't talk about very much.
Senator McEwen.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Commissioner. And, you know, I appreciate that. And I guess I would communicate that I know that a large group of my own constituents up in Duluth are watching this and also watching the way that the agency responds to ongoing litigation about permitting, and have taken some offense sometimes to the way that the agency has sort of messaged things that are happening. So as the agency does look at its own role, I think it would help the people in my district and all throughout Minnesota to have the transparency of understanding what exactly the agency is taking as lessons going forward, what it has learned, changes that it's going to make, where it thought it did well, where it thought it didn't do well, because there is absolutely, I'm seeing a disconnect there at certain times. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator McEwen. And Commissioner, I will just add my own comments. As a senator the pipeline went right through the middle of my district. I want to commend you and all agencies for the great communication that you have done. And my constituents are really pretty elated with what has happened for them and for their area. And so I guess I have a different viewpoint because it's my constituents who are actually impacted with that. So I just want to thank you, and I look forward to the end results of the investigation, and look forward to that report. With that, I do have just one maybe small question. So the electric school buses, was that part of the VW settlement?
Yes, Chair Rude, it was funded by the VW settlement.
Okay. I had all those VWs in my district, so there was hundreds of them parked in the district. So it's interesting to see where actually the money is being spent down the road. So this will be an interesting, especially with our climate, it is cold as is, how the electric school buses really work and operate. So I think that that pilot is be interesting to follow. And then the only other comment I had was on Andover, which I guess that's really amazing for that community. And so what, do we know where that contamination came from? Are we aware of that? Or I guess that's really pretty amazing for those homeowners to be put through that pollution.
Yeah, Chair Rude, it is unfortunate and we do not know where the contamination is coming from, but we continue to look. And in the meantime, public safety and safe drinking water supply is the paramount consideration and priority. And so that is what we are doing now and ensuring that people have safe water to drink in their homes while we continue to look for a source and ultimately figure out what we can do to mitigate that source.
So was this discovered just on an, was it something that folks were looking for? Or was it just like, normally as a realtor, we test water in every home that we, that we sell, we do, and that's a typical thing, a water quality test. And I'm sure that the cities annually or periodically test. Is that how it was found, or was it something you were looking for?
So I'm going to ask Commissioner Kudelka to weigh in at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Kudelka.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. The finding of the contaminated drinking water in the private well started off with some of our additional sampling around WDE, a closed landfill for contaminants emerging concern, 1,4-dioxane and PFAS. That was made available by investments by the legislature and the closed landfill investment fund. So thank you for those dollars. However, as we started to look into it, and the commissioner mentioned, it didn't follow the regular pattern of contamination from a landfill. As you move from a landfill, the numbers should get lower as you go away from the landfill. The opposite happened. The numbers got larger as we went away from the landfill. So we believe there is definitely another source here, and the investigation will look into that, and also whether the landfill is playing a contributing factor. But this is still more work to be done to pinpoint the exact piece. And as the commissioner mentioned, our first and priority in these investigations is the private wells and making sure that folks are having safe drinking water and then providing them bottled water and long-term solutions as we continue to take on the investigation, which will take more time.
Thank you. Members, other questions? Senator Senja?
Thank you. And just a brief follow-up to your school bus question and the Volkswagen settlement money. As I recall, there was, I don't know, $7, $8, $9 million for charging stations around the state of Minnesota. Have they been installed yet?
Commissioner.
Chair Rude and Senator Senjum, thank you for that question. And now we're going to have the other assistant commissioner join us here. Craig McDonald is best suited to speak to the VW use of those dollars.
Mr. McDonald, welcome. Please identify yourself for the tape.
Chair Rude, for the record, my name is Craig McDonald, Assistant Commissioner for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And Senator Sindem, to your question, under the VW settlement, we can use up to 15% of the total settlement, which is about $7 million on charging infrastructure. To date, we have installed or will be installing about 60 DC fast chargers with that money and 25 level 2 chargers there. So we have expanded corridors across Minnesota by, once completed, 3,600 miles from the VW settlement, where the traveling public will be able to utilize those chargers.
Senator
Madam Chair,
Senjum.
just so I heard that, was that 60?
60, yes, 60.
Class 1 and how many class 2?
Those are DC fast chargers, and then it's 25 level 2. So the
Okay,
DC
25
fast
level
chargers
2,
are
okay.
up to 150 kilowatts.
So 85
Senator
altogether out there someplace. Good. Madam Chair, generally on highway corridors or,
Mr. McDonald.
commercial sites or kind of just generally where?
Senator Sinjim, along highway corridors, as part of the VW process, we made people bid on installing charging corridors. So an entire stretch of road that's based on traffic patterns and use. So installing a charger every 30 to 70 miles to establish that you could get from where you want to go.
Senator Sinjim.
Madam Chair, just one question begets another one, but so I guess the new electric cars are smart enough to find the chargers. So I'm thinking I've never seen a highway sign that said electric chargers, but maybe we don't need them given electronics that we live in this today. So I think the car finds a charger if it needs it.
Mr. McDonald.
Senator Sinjim, hopefully your car is finding it, but the issue with signage is something we're working with our partners at the Minnesota Department of Transportation on. Signage is, of course, always kind of tough to deal with. There are federal regulations to it, but hopefully the traveling public's getting their charges where they need them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. McDonald, those 85 different stations that are there, does that use up the entirety of that, the amount of money out of the settlement, or is there still money that is to be spent?
Mr. McDonald.
Madam Chair and Senator Weber, there is still money to be sent for the chargers. We are allotting the VW settlement in 3 phases. We're currently in our 2nd phase. So we've awarded about 1/3 of those funds. And similar, that third is similar for the fast chargers and other charging equipment.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Well, with that, Senator Her.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to put in a good comment that will be looking forward to work with Commissioner Kessler and also, your positive comment earlier on the salt application, Madam Chair. I think that will be a subject that we'll be working on this coming session. I'm kind of 2 days ago, I kind of give DNR the credit for the salt level of reducing salt level of Lake Phelan because the funding that did the study did go to legacy and all that. But I think one of the big credit do go to PCA agency itself. So I just want to close with that. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. With that, Commissioner Kessler, thank you so much for coming to our committee today and introducing yourself and talking about your agency, and to all of your deputies that spoke to. We really appreciate you answering our questions here today. And so with that, members, seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair Rude and Senators.